I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us once again, a big picture Wall Street veteran analyst. He's had a couple of decades experience on Wall Street, both domestically and internationally. He, as I said, is a big picture guy. Back in November of 2014, the guest that you're about to see said that his prediction was damage control was going to start to wear off in 2015. And I think he nailed it. A lot of analysts think the damage control is wearing off. We're talking about Warren Pollock. Warren Pollock, thank you for coming to us from New York today.
Good to be here, Greg.
Well, a lot of people think that, analysts come on and they say, the sky is falling. They think they're being Chicken Little because it hasn't, happened just like that. But listen, everybody that I talk to that handle billions of dollars, whether inflation or they're deflation or whatever, everybody says two really main things. The world economy is in deep trouble. I mean, we have negative interest rates in Europe, a couple $1 trillion. The world economy is in deep trouble, number one. Number two, this is totally unsustainable, and we're headed for some sort of a crash. And my question to you is, for people that sit there and say, it hasn't happened yet, and these people, have to adjust their predictions. I mean, what's happening is huge. And the predictions, I mean, you're just missing, and we're talking about in the span of time, just missing a little bit. Why have so many people gotten this so wrong, and why have the powers that be, why are they putting this off and doing this spin control? Why?
Well, I think people are looking for an inflection point. And we had a big point of drama in 2007 and 8, about 7 years ago with a market crash. And before that, we had another inflection point in 2001 with the World Trade Center. And these are big dramatic events as opposed to a fester on a very long timeline. And I think you mentioned something else which is very important. A lot of people have what I would call an investment thesis. A lot of the people that you speak to are wrapped up with this idea that Wall Street is relevant. And I would say at this point, Wall Street and central banks are irrelevant. They're irrelevant against the long time frame that this trajectory is playing out upon. In other words, if we think about the industrial era, where it started around 1760, around 1776, that's a very long trajectory. And although things are not happening instantly, that trajectory is unwinding as it is proving to be untenable. And right now, we have this long trajectory from 1760 against people's mindsets. And now, Twitter, 144 characters, is not short enough. Now there's something called Vines, which your kids probably use, which is a 5-second repeating video. So the time horizon that people are looking at is just entirely out of phase with the reality, which is the longer-term trend. And on the longer-term trend, there are some profound things which are happening beyond finance to the greater world that are of significant concern. Fukushima is one of them, and I would say that's permanent environmental degradation. Now, I'm not saying that Fukushima is going to have a dramatic effect on your life or my life, but it does degrade the supporting capacity of the Earth as it relates to mankind. And it's done so for at least 1 million people who will probably die from cesium-related cancers or strontium-related cancers. But that's just one of many degradations that have occurred on an environmental basis that will have a profound effect on humankind in general.
You said that the damage control is going to start to weigh off. Why have damage control in the first place anyway? Why don't our leaders come out and say, listen, this is unsustainable. We have some big problems with the economy. We're going to have to change the global economy. Things are going to change, and it's going to be painful for some people. But instead they tell us that we have an unemployment rate in the U.S. of 5% or something ridiculous when we have 93 million people almost out of the workforce. That we're growing when indeed we're not growing. That we don't have inflation when indeed we do have inflation. What's up with the gamesmanship for the spin control, which is wearing off, as you said?
Well, we have no leadership caste. I mean, we have a nomenclatura of elite people. And then we have Tamagotchis. And a Tamagotchi are you know what a Tamagotchi is?
Yeah.
A Tamagotchi is an electronic toy from the 1980s. And it's a little virtual pet that people keep around on their keychain, and they could press a few buttons to feed it, to put it to sleep, to move it around, to interact with it. And that's the way that people have been programmed in the United States worldwide. People are now playing the role of a Tamagotchi. So they have a pre-programmed existence. They're going to go into debt to buy a house. They're going to go into debt to buy a car. They're going to have a job in a corporation. They're going to go to college, go into debt for that. They're going to find they have a clerk's job once they get out of college. And they're going to do everything that they've been told to do. And that is no longer going to work for them. But those are the Tamagotchis. And then on the other side, you have the nomenclatura, who are people who are highly literate. They went to the best schools. Their kids are going to $20,000 preschools. They're working for corporations. They're working for, quote, the federal government or the state government. They're entitled. They have a higher standard of living. But they've done nothing but to preserve the momentum of the system at large, to enslave other people who are no longer anything but Tamagotchis, living this very narrow existence of inputs and outputs, just people that are just disenfranchised entirely from the American dream or from anything that resembles capitalism.
And so the damage control is for what reason?
It's to keep the nomenclature in place. That's the sole reason why there's damage control. It keeps the Congress in place. It keeps the presidents and vice presidents of corporations in place. And I was a vice president of a company that built a high-frequency trading network that was eventually taken over by the New York Stock Exchange. People that are in the nomenclature, they have a high standard of living. They don't know why they have a high standard of living. There's absolutely no overview. So the only thing that can be done is to keep that rice bowl intact, to keep the momentum intact, to keep the lies intact, and to keep people controlled as if they are Tamagotchis. To say that if they do this, and this, they're going to have a great lifestyle. They're going to have the American dream. The American dream is that of consumerism, and that has been the lie which has been told to people on a worldwide basis. And you're either a consumer or an Islamist. That's the two ideologies right now which are at play on a global basis.
And we're headed for some sort of failure, no matter how many times they lie, no matter what the spin control is.
Sure.
We're headed for a failure. That's why it's wearing off. Is that correct?
Well, you'll have an inflection point, for sure, similar to 2008 or 2001. But behind the scenes, there's sort of two great conspiracies which are occurring behind the scenes. One is the conspiracy which revolves around life support. Life support is becoming less and less tenable on a global basis. And we talk about things such as GMO foods, for instance. What if the only way for mankind to survive would be to genetically modify animals and plants? What if the only way for mankind to survive is to have indoor agriculture? What if the only way for man to survive is to move away from the coast? What if the only way for man to survive is to cull the population or to have the population culled? And when you look at things, there's one movie, I think a very bad movie, Kingsman. Have you seen Kingsman yet?
I have not.
But what's so interesting is there's some very smart people who are working in Hollywood, and they'll posit something which is potentially truthful, and it will come out in sort of a very profound way. And what Kingsman was talking about was beyond, let's say, global warming or climate change. It was that the damage to the environment has already been done. People are a virus that have to be eliminated, or the virus will eliminate the host. That was the conclusion or the spoiler behind Kingsman. So what I'm trying to tell you is that some very bright people who are thinking about things come up with an idea of a possibility. And rather than this possibility being expressed to you through a leadership cast, it's being expressed to you through the nomenclatura, people that are highly educated who are sort of leaking this idea out behind the scenes. And that's the way now that all information works. It sort of leaks out in the seams. Another example of that is the comedy. We could see. I don't follow him, but who's that person that does political comedy?
Jon Stewart.
Jon Stewart. So when you don't have a direct way for a leadership cast to communicate to the people, it leaks out through the edges. So you have Jon Stewart, who's using comedy to try to get a message of reality out to the people, out to the Tamaguchi.
Yeah, and then he says, oh, I'm just a comedian.
And then he says he's just a comedian. Yeah. But you were on a major news network, and you would be fired the minute that you came up with a hard news story of any kind. There's absolutely no doubt about it. You would be fired. You would be blacklisted. So the only way for reality to express is through these alternate means. And it boils down to comedy, or through the movies, or through someone writing a press article. And you and I exchange emails. I send you maybe one email a month, and I'm sending you an email of a story, the only story out of hundreds, which may make sense in an overview type of picture. So news does leak out of the reality. What the reality is, that's something else. But things are not functioning properly.
Things are not functioning. And I even said it last week in my weekly news wrap-up. I said there's so much propaganda. There's so much information and disinformation and slanted information and information where they leave things out, or information where the Prime Minister of Israel, a couple of years ago, his own Mossad said, outed him and said, hey, you said that, that Iran is much closer to a bomb than what we think they really are. And then you have the Iranians on the other side. They put out all kinds of propaganda about what Snowden said that he didn't say. But anyway, you sent me this in one of our email exchanges, and you gave this Goebbels quote, and it says, I think of the press as a great keyboard on which government can play. Joseph Goebbels. You say, modern-day version, Warren Pollock. Think of data as a great keyboard on which the government, inverted totalitarianism, can play. I mean, that's a profound. Goebbels' day, it was just the press. And in our day, you're pointing out it's the data that's the great keyboard, and the data is bad. And
the data is totally bad, and it's not only circular logic; it goes beyond that point, where it's really a Mobius strip. It's a circle that folds in upon itself. So right now, let's use the thing called global warming. You'll have people on both sides. I believe in global warming. I don't believe in global warming.
I personally don't. I don't think, but anyway.
All right, but you can find the facts that support your position, and the real issue doesn't get addressed. The real issue doesn't get addressed. The global warming has nothing to do with anything. It's a fake issue on both one side or the other. The Democrats and Republicans, the left and the right. These are just fake divide and conquer issues that people talk about. If you wanted to frame the issue correctly, what environmental damage has been done to the planet that cannot be undone? That's the proper way to frame the issue. And then you get to a point where the facts are irrefutable. Would you live next to Fukushima? And the answer is no. And that is how information is controlled. That is the keyboard that the government is playing. And the people are just following along with that same tune. And Wikipedia today is suing the NSA. But when you look at Wikipedia, almost everything you read in Wikipedia is incorrect, one way or the other.
Oh, we could not use it as a source at CNN.
As a source. And if
you could not use that as a source.
If you look at Google, they're looking to validate Google with the Internet. And that is just absurd. So you're validating lies with lies. And right now, in terms of the press, there are very few people who are actually doing research on any of the stories which come across your desk. Very few of them, if any.
So talk to me about let's talk about the wear off of the damage control. Give me the signs that the damage control is wearing off. People I talk to are now starting to say, things are bad.
Go to your supermarket.
Multiple ways that things are bad financially. Give me your signs of the damage control wearing off.
Go to your supermarket. Go to your supermarket. And that's the damage control wearing off.
Prices going up.
Prices going up, quality of food going down, the number of ounces on each package going down, the way that goods are priced. In Walmart, you used to have that little orange price, which helped you compare costs. That used to be per pound. Now it's by ounce. So this is the damage control wearing off. And when you go into the supermarket, you probably have enough money to spend to buy food that you need. You don't know sometimes you don't know if it's nutritious or if it will kill you. But a lot of people just frankly don't have that purchasing power, and they won't have that purchasing power in inflation or deflation. So if we look at issue framing, why even talk about inflation or deflation? Why not just talk about purchasing power? So if you were going to go up against someone, quote, our government, you would ask them a question, how come my purchasing power has gone away? How come I have to take a 7-year loan to buy a car?
That's the damage control wearing off, the 7-year loan for a car. That's the damage control
wearing off. And how many people in the world don't have electricity? How many people have been beneficiaries of the Arab Spring, which is another piece of propaganda, people may not have food to buy, so they riot. And then, we have today, I think, in Egypt, Sisi is closing, 27,000 mosques.
Why?
Why? Because he's controlling the information landscape in Egypt. That's the only way that he can do it. So people go right now in the United States onto the internet, and that's where they get their information. But people in Egypt maybe go to their mosque to get information, to get their leadership message across. So by closing that down, he closes down the information flow. The same thing has happened with the internet. After all, the internet is a DARPA project. It's a project which came from the government and now is totally controlled by our government. It's just who the government is. That's another question to ask, really. And I say it's inverted.
When the damage control finally wears off, and we're headed for some sort of a failure, correct? I mean, with this big trend, we're headed for a failure?
For sure, and the failures are expressing every single day. The small failures are expressing every single day, and they're absolutely noticeable if you care to notice them. As to dramatic inflection points, that's the differentiation. So on a day-to-day basis, to see this crisis unfold, go to your supermarket. Ask your politician in Congress a question. Look at the legislation that they're passing. Look at changes to the law in terms of banking and derivatives. So we had, before the mortgage blow up, changes to the bankruptcy law. Before student loans blow up, there's changes to the bankruptcy law. Before derivatives blow up, there's changes to the law and how they're handled by the FDIC.
They just did that in December with John
They just did that in December, right.
And so that means that's predicting a coming failure.
That's
the derivatives market.
The derivatives market failure, absolutely. And the modus operandi, or the tool, has been to steal from the Tamagotchi, because the Tamagotchi just looks so narrowly at things that he doesn't protest. So right now, if you're a Tamagotchi and have $500,000 in savings and under zero interest rate policy, you're being starved to death through hidden taxation. That's definitely happening to you. So for you, the collapse has already happened. So there's no need to look at anything dramatic. We might very well have a dramatic inflection point, such as a nuclear reactor exploding, a war with Pakistan. That's another area where the press sort of leaked out the reality. There's a show called Homeland, and they were smacked down because they were talking about Pakistan. They were told
Pakistan in
not to talk about Pakistan.
In 2013, Pakistan, it made it out in the press. This was a good little piece of information that bubbled out, and that Saudi Arabia was buying nuclear weapons, and they said they had them on order before John Kerry got to Saudi Arabia. Who were they talking to? Top people of Pakistan. Are they buying more nuclear weapons? Are they taking delivery? You can bet Saudi Arabia probably by now has nuclear weapons, but the press doesn't say anything about it.
Are they taking delivery of conventional weapons? Saudi Arabia?
Saudi Arabia, according to an India source that they were kind of had their lip puffed out, that Saudi Arabia was the biggest buyer of conventional weapons in 2014, followed by India, and followed by, after that, China. I mean that is pretty frightening.
What's happening in Bahrain? How come no one talks about that? What's happening in Bahrain?
So what do you think is happening with the real story in the Middle East. I mean, is it really Iran getting a nuclear bomb, or
No,
is Israel really feeling like they're being threatened, even though they're being attacked by Hamas in the north and in the south, and Hezbollah in the north? I mean, do they have some legitimate concerns? Does Iran have legitimate concerns? Or is that just a sideshow?
Well, that's the way that you should approach information finding. It's just ask a series of questions, using a Socratic method.
But I'm asking you.
And that's the way that you.
What do you think about that situation? What do you think about the situation in the Middle East? What's your picture?
I have some perceptions. My perceptions is that Israel is really irrelevant. Even with Netanyahu showing up to Congress, Israel, from a U.S. standpoint, is absolutely irrelevant, and that's something which Israel recognizes.
Because
it's getting closer in back channels with Saudi Arabia. It's getting closer with Russia, and Israel has no choice other than to do this. So when I look at Saudi Arabia, I look at people in Saudi Arabia that are very happy because they're paid off by the king of the royal family of Saudi Arabia. They go to college in Boston absolutely free on the king's dime. And although they had a change in leadership there, the people are happy as long as they're paid off. Maybe some of the depressed prices in oil is a war that's sort of happening, a soft war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's very possible. But when you look at Islamic violence, it numbers in the tens to maybe 50 a day. There was 50 people killed, I think, in Nigeria, Islamic against Islamic violence in Nigeria. But this violence on a statistical basis is a very low din. It doesn't in any way justify U.S. anti-terrorist policy, U.S. banking policies, total information control, total information awareness. It's just a rationalization to control the Tamagotchi.
That's the boogeyman, terrorism.
Terrorism, it's the boogeyman. And guess what? As a child, Russia was always the enemy. We did duck and cover in school. I didn't know what these strange fire drills were. You had to get out into the hall, duck your head against the locker, and hope you weren't blown into bits by a Soviet nuclear bomb. Guess what? The, quote, leadership caste, inverted totalitarianism, can extract more dollars by making Russia the enemy. They can extract more dollars by making terrorism the enemy. But there's no money to be made in having a nuclear war with Pakistan. There's no money to be made, hence you don't hear anything about it. So there's going to be two competing ideologies in the world. One is consumerism, and a lot of people in China have been bought off by consumerism. The other is Islam. There's fights between Islam and Islam, Islam and Coptic Christians, Islam and Jews. It's just a religion of instability.
Are we headed for war?
Oh, absolutely. We're headed for war because there's no truth. And without truth, war is the greatest expression of failure that there can be.
And are we headed for a colossal collapse? Some people, I had 2 or 3 people. I had Jonathan Kahn on, who wrote the best-selling book Harbinger, and now he's out with the Shemitah, which is talking about 7-year cycles, which you brought up. 7 years, 7 years back to 2008. And
well, there's also,
and then also other people, Morgan, other people, Armstrong, a lot of people are saying they're looking at some sort of financial collapse, some inflection point, to your point, coming up this fall.
Well, there's people such as W.D. Gann, who did a lot of analysis based on cycles, his P&F charts and other methodologies, which look at cycles. And cycles I think are definitely real, although they are esoteric. Myself, I like to deal in trajectories. Where we've been, where are we going?
So what's your trajectory?
Well, it's not good, but it's a long trajectory. My trajectory is really this idea of the Anthropocene era. The Anthropocene era, which is a fancy word. You could look it up, but it's really mankind's impact on the world, the point in time where we cease to cooperate with the natural system of the world through the extraction of energy through the steam engine, through oil, through carbon-based energy.
Is that coming this fall? Are you of the mind that we can have an inflection point this fall?
I think we could have an inflection point this fall. My prediction was, and I think it's accurate, that the damage control wears off. You could see it in the politicking between the Republicans and the Democrats. You could see it in the rhetoric against Russia or against ISIS. You could see it in the changes to the law as it relates to the handling of derivatives. You could see it in the prices of the food in your grocery store. You could also see monopoly pricing. The fact that oil has gone down in price, but nothing has gone in price downwards in result to that, or in result to that oil price decline. For example, Coca-Cola has to be moved by truck across the country. Cantaloupe needs to be moved across the country on a truck or moved from Chile to the United States. None of these prices have gone down because in inverted totalitarianism, it's very similar to what people describe as communism, where you only have one or two sources for the goods which you depend upon for life support. So there's no propensity for prices to decline, even if the price of a core input such as oil has gone down. So we're really hostage to the nomenclatura. We're hostage to people that are looking for margin. We're hostage to people that could see the price of an airline ticket go down and then offset it with a rise in taxation. We're subject to the welfare state, where we have make-work jobs in the TSA. It's the largest welfare program. It's similar to the Conservation Corps under Roosevelt. It has nothing to do at all with security, but if you frame the issue correctly, it's putting people to work in a welfare state, in a communistic state. And in the communistic state, it's not a socialistic state under Trotsky. It's a communistic state. It's a communistic state where there are elites and serfs. Nomenclatura, Tamaguchi. That was communism. But that's not socialism. And certainly it's not the free market, for sure. So I think that we have maybe two people that are probably going to be proved correct. One is Ross Perot, and the other is probably Karl Marx. And Ross Perot said that if the U.S. arbitraged its jobs off to Mexico, our standard of living would go to zero. And guess what? Ross Perot is an incredible capitalist. Guess what? The incredible socialist, said the same exact thing. In an industrialized world, labor as a commodity trends value towards zero. And so you have people on both sides of the spectrum.
What does Karl Marx say?
So that's what Karl Marx said. He said that with mechanization, you would need less labor, and therefore labor would be commoditized, and the value of labor would trend to zero. That's exactly what Ross Perot said. Ross Perot, head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, presidential candidate. So you have, the commensurate socialist and the commensurate capitalist telling you something which is true on both ends of the spectrum, and that's how you find the truth. The truth, all politics is local. So when you hear about Putin, it's local politics, not geopolitics. But when you hear about something that's true across politics, that tells you that it's a true statement.
And you're saying that as the damage control wears off, and what happens to the people who don't wake up until the very end?
What happens to the people that are victims of Fukushima and never recovered? And that is, something I talked about with Charlie McGrath over at Wide Awake News. We used to coin this idea of a person called an unperson, where they fall off the face of the news. So you don't know how many people are suffering from Chernobyl heart or thyroid cancer.
But I'm talking about when there are a lot of people that are sound asleep. People on my side, people watching this interview, are not sound asleep.
Well,
what's going to be the difference between the people that are watching interviews like this and taking it in and going, okay, we know there's an inflection point coming, we know there's big trouble, as opposed to the people who were doing 140 characters and did you see what's on American Idol? Did you hey, look at me and my new me in Acapulco, things are great. I mean, what happens to the people that think things are great and who believe things are great? And what happens to the people like watching this interview who say, oh, warning, danger? We're headed for something. We just don't know when it is. What's the difference in those two people?
What happened to the Jews that stayed in Germany to wind up in an oven in Auschwitz, versus what happened to the Jews that might have seen this coming and then left? But here's the kicker: it's almost going to be impossible for you to change your geography and to survive what's coming. It's going to be near impossible for you to change your geography because this is a global event, not on a short timeline, but on a very long timeline. So what's going to hit us is harder than anything that anyone could imagine. And I tried with you last time to draw an analogy to World War II. what happened in the Soviet Union in terms of their population when so many people died per day during World War II. That's something which is out of the bounds of imagination. It's out of the generational
They lost
knowledge.
27 million, something like that.
Something like that, against the population, which was tiny at the time. It was a large percentage of their population. It would be.
And you're thinking the same type of carnage is going to happen again.
Again, it's absolutely assured, but it's not going to be dramatic. So at least by being aware, you could, hone the main survival skill that you have, and that's flexibility to changing events and not to fall prey to rationalization.
And you think this fall, you think we could be headed for a war or some inflection point or something? That's what you're thinking.
Well, the odds of an inflection point are increased, certainly now, because things are becoming more evident. But what I said specifically was that things would become more evident. And I think that they have. If you're looking for drama, turn on Real Housewives of Los Angeles or New Jersey or whatever that show is, or Kim Kardashian. If you want to be flexible, then start to approach things with an open mind, realize that you can be a sort of a victim of dissonance, and that you can be victimized by what you perceive to be the truth. And I wanted to mention, I showed you a book earlier by Victor Surov, I believe, Inside the Aquarium. It's a former KGB officer. And what insight there is in that book is he tells you how he examined information, what information is relevant, what information is true. And very few people have the ability to wade through the dissonance, the lies that are pervasive in the internet. And I would just say to start to turn it off. Turn off the financial news, turn off the investment thesis, turn off the people that are selling you ideas around finance. There's no point to it at this point in time.
So as we close, you gave us a nice prediction in 2014 about 2015. How does 2015, in your estimation, end?
I think it ends as we approach the presidential election, and you're going to see a lot of contention around issues which are absolutely meaningless. And my suggestion to you is not to vote and to start to withdraw from giving your consent to lies that are pervasive. So that's your best defense at this point, is to cease giving consent. I can't tell you what.
So your overall thesis is you think that you're going to start seeing more and more contention as we are on our way to an implosion?
I think so. And I think that your role in this whole process is to start to withdraw your consent from being lied to. And that is part of taking responsibility. Take responsibility. Werner Erhard is a guy you might want to look to in that regard, the founder of EST. And he said that you need to take responsibility not only for yourself, but for the bigger picture. And I think that we need to do that, certainly as we approach the elections. I think if you're voting in this election, you're doing yourself a disservice if you believe anything that's been told to you about Benghazi or about any of the other parties or any of the other personalities. You're just living your life as a Tamaguchi. It's going to be against your interests as things change over time. We might see an inflection point. We might see something slow burn, such as Austin Fitz said on your channel. We're going to see a combination probably of both. There's a renaissance that's out there, but that's just not for the Tamaguchi. That's
She's giving it a 40% chance of blowing.
She's probably very correct in her assessment. But in terms of a renaissance, that's not something that you or I will probably enjoy. I think that's just going to be narrowed down to a very small amount of people.
Warren Pollock, you don't have a newsletter, you don't have a website, you're just on here to educate us. Warren Pollock, thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com and giving us your big picture views. Very, very unusual, very different. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks.